I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today, I am back in my Santa Cruz home with my real computer and my real sound system and editing software. So, the quality, I hope, will be better of the production. And today, I'm going to be talking about the economics of anarchy. You know that I always like to start by defining the question. So, what's an economy? An economy is a system that uses money that is issued and collected and backed by ownership of the assets in order to organize labor. Now, what's anarchy? Anarchy is rule by rules rather than rulers. An is from the Greek, which means without, and archons were the Greek rulers who assumed their ability to organize labor because they claimed ownership of all the land. So, if we're going to be our own policymakers, if we're going to be the czars of our fiefdoms, we have to start talking about policy, not about personalitics, not about who's the better person to solve all of our problems. We need to figure out how would we solve our problems if we were in charge. So let's get started. As czarina of your fiefdom, one of the ways that people will try to trap you is by asking, are you a socialist or a capitalist? Do you believe in private ownership or not? And you need to answer that that's a false dichotomy. In socialism, as we have it today, it means that there is no private ownership, that there is collective ownership by the state, which essentially means that there's a monopoly of people who decide how to distribute the products of other people's labor. And under capitalism, as we have it today, there is a monopoly on power because the banks claim ownership of all the assets, and then they issue the mortgages against them. So that way, they're the owners of everything. It's not really private ownership. In any system, what you want to encourage is ownership. People's homes, their assets, their labor, their creativity, their intelligence, these are things that people should own. But there's always a default ownership when things change generations. There's a default ownership of the knowledge. There's a default ownership of the homes. People don't just assume everything as soon as they come of age. So what you're going to be is the banker. You're going to be the capitalist banker that issues the mortgages against those homes. And so you're the default owner, but you're the one who's holding it and creating the credit in between while someone is earning their right to actually have private ownership of a home. The next problem you'll face are the naive do-gooders who tell you that you need to take responsibility as government for solving the problems of all people. And you're going to be inheriting a lot of problems that capitalism has caused. And I think naive do-gooders, or NDGs as I call them, are actually more dangerous than the psychopaths. Because the psychopaths wouldn't get away with anything if they didn't have naive do-gooders in order to manipulate and to be able to present that face to government that is well-meaning and caring, and aren't we going to do something about this? Now, this goes back to the babies in the river dilemma, as it's called. So here's the scenario. There are all these babies that are flowing down the river that have been thrown in. And do you rescue the babies, or do you go to the start of the river and figure out who's throwing them in? I've never understood why that's even a dilemma. Of course you go and find out who's throwing them in, because if you don't stop them, there will just be more. So you'll always be in a state of rescuing the babies, which is where we are right now. We can't afford to take any attention to go and find out and hold responsible those who are throwing in the babies. So the way that this translates now is that we feel that we're responsible for solving homelessness, for instance, even though the capitalists, the bankers who have usurped ownership of all of the houses, have no responsibility for that. This last week, my daughter and I had a lively, friendly discussion with my ex-brother-in-law about these ideas. And one of the things he asked was, well, what do you think about universal basic income? Let's say $1,000 per person per month. And I turned that around on him and said, well, as czar of your fiefdom, do you want to do universal basic income? So let's play that scenario out if everything is the way that it is now, where the bankers own the housing. If you put $1,000 a month out for 100,000 people, that's $1 billion every month that's not getting collected back in any way. So that money within a generation will go to the bankers because it'll bid up the cost of housing by $1,000 per bedroom. So whether that takes a little while, in the meantime, it'll go to wherever the cost of labor is cheapest. So for your food production, it'll get extracted to other countries or corporations that are using cheap labor, and it will get sucked out for cheap goods that are being made elsewhere and for energy that's being mined elsewhere. In the end, you're not going to have any of that money. You're going to have to keep producing it and having it be devalued. Now, let's say that you've taken back the economy and you have the houses, and that's a way that the money is going to be returned to you. So you know that you can generate that $1,000 a month because that's what comes back already in the form of mortgages and rents. Now, you put out that $1,000 a month, and what happens? People just pay it for their housing. It doesn't create anything new. And then the rest of their money just does those same things in finding the cheapest source of labor. That's why my system does the same thing, but forces it to create economic activity before that money comes back. So I do, say, 200 carrots a month each for food production, for well care, for education, and for home improvements. And then I take the other 200 and I would put it towards something that the neighborhood wants to do together. So in each case, it can't just be something that someone says, okay, here, I'll put this towards my mortgage or towards my rent. In order to use it, they have to earn it from someone else. So it makes sure that there's at least one round of economic activity before that goes and gets extracted for your housing. Another popular policy position is student debt forgiveness, and then to make education free, because education is a human right, and healthcare is a human right, and food is a human right, and housing is a human right. So if you're going to make all of these things what is free, who are you going to make your slaves? Because if those things are free to us, someone has to produce them, and they need to not own the product of their own labor. They need to not be entitled to eat the food that they produce, to live in the house that they build, to have an education that they give and are compensated for. So these are things that I think we need to think through. If you forgive student debt, it means that no one will ever loan for education again, and that those who either didn't go to college or went to a less expensive college or worked their way through, or their parents took out a second mortgage in order to send them through or saved their money to send them through. All of those students are going to be at a disadvantage because that will end up having been the same as if they just went to the most expensive school they could get into and never put a penny towards it. As I've talked about in other episodes, and as I talk about in my book, How to Dismantle an Empire, usurious student debt is a huge problem, and it's one that you need to solve in your fiefdom. But there are other ways to solve it. You can limit the length of time and the amount per month that any debt is owed. And then, after you've made that doable, you can push that amount in community credit into the community in a way that are jobs that you want students to do. So that way, there's enough money in the economy doing useful things that I think students would be very thrilled to do, and you've made it where they can accomplish it. They're not going to be stymied in terms of being able to buy a house. It is something that is manageable, but it doesn't just absolve it. It makes it part of the economy and it creates jobs. In terms of the other areas of food and housing and healthcare, you've created a system where there is reciprocity. You've created 4 areas where pretty much anyone can do at least one, if not all of them. So everyone has a way of being able to do something useful for the community and to be able to bring in the money that they need. This is a supplemental system, not one that replaces the dollar or the euro or whatever imperial currency you're under. So the only thing it takes from capitalism is the power to create the mortgages. And the only thing it takes from government is the power to create and collect the retirement funds. Social Security is the only thing that it's using in order to protect it. So for everyone where that capitalist system is working for them, you just say, go to it. And it's all the better for you because it gives you the ability to put more people to work within the system that you have. And what you can give those people who are working for corporations is the ability to translate, say, $6,000 or euros or whatever into the local credit with no taxes taken out. So at a 1-to-1 advantage. And that enables them to be able to pay their mortgages, be able to pay their rents, and not have to pay any taxes on that kind of local produce other than their Social Security. For the rest of what they have, they can spend it, but when they spend it, it's going to be taxed at 50%. So this enables them to have a savings account, but also be able to participate in your economy. And what it gives you is that $6,000 or whatever every month in order to put into your reserves. Now, if you're taxing dollars at 50% or carats if they're translated into dollars, that means that you can create twice as many carats in your economy as you have dollars in reserve. So that at that point, as you build up those reserves, it means that you don't have as much coming out in debt as you have circulating in the economy. According to Benjamin Franklin, no more than 20% of the money should be created through debt. The rest of it should be spent into the economy by the government. And so you want to start building up that kind of reserve by thanking the people who are working in the dollar economy and giving them the benefit of your local economy while you're making this transition and building up your independence. Another thing that a maximum wage does is that it makes things affordable that are within the carrot economy. If no one, no matter how much skill and education and status they have, can make more than $60 an hour, that means that your health care is going to be something you can afford without having to have insurance. It's going to be something that amasses enough money to be able to provide that equipment and have money go in employing a lot more people because it can't be monopolized. And the other thing I love about it is that it makes it where enough is enough. You can get to a point where you know that you have a certain amount of Social Security that's going to be coming back. And let's say you give your Social Security fund a 7 to 8% return so that you know it is solvent forever. And then you can allow people to put in, say, 900 carats a month into their long-term savings, into their retirement savings, into savings for a house, and you can give that, say, a 4% return. And you can allow people to borrow for any reason because what they want is to be able to keep it in there because that's going to be their retirement. But it doesn't hurt you if they withdraw and then have the ability to replace it as they're able to. So these are things that let someone relax, that makes it where having enough for retirement isn't a competition. It isn't something where you have to keep pace with inflation. There is no inflation. In fact, the cost would be declining under my system. So I love that. I love being able to say, all right, I've earned enough now where I'm covered. And now I can make sure that my kids are going to be able to put money into their retirement. And I have really no further use other than helping other people because I know that I'm going to be okay. And that could be possible for all of us. In a small segue into spirituality, I was reading my Course in Miracles this morning, and I'm on the manual for teachers. So the question is, who is God's teacher? And the answer is anyone who sees their purpose as not different from someone else's. And seeing that just at one point in time makes someone a teacher of God, even if they would never use that word, because it sees another person as not separate from them. And then it says that every teacher of God saves 1,000 years as the world sees time. So the ending is inevitable. But in the meantime, time just drags on wearily, and the world is so tired. And so our job is to save time. But it tickled me that it's 1,000 years. It's not thousands of years. It's not up to 1,000 years. There's no competition. You just take on this role, which seems simple enough to see other people's purposes as no different than your own, and you save 1,000 years. I love that. I've also been having this discussion with Matt Ehret on his Substack, and so some of those questions that came up are, do you back your currency with the housing, or do you give the housing to the bankers for free and then borrow the gold back from them that they're going to collect in order to back your currency? We looked at free trade versus protective tariffs, and both of us are very much in favor of protective tariffs. But he sees the localization of free trade as being a good thing. So I think there is a balance to that, and it's particular to your fiefdom. That is there a discrepancy between the earning power of people who are outside of your community? Do you want to give your neighbors an advantage in terms of productivity and also in terms of ownership of the assets? Those are things I think everyone needs to decide for themselves. I also think that you could institute free trade with, say, sister cities that are halfway around the world, but who have a common understanding with you of what your labor policies are, what your environmental policies are, whatever it is that matters to your community. And the last topic we looked at was a standing army. Do you want your fiefdom to have a standing military? Now, this brings up the definition of defense, and is defense only when someone attacks you on your own soil. In that case, what you need are people who are trained in order to defend the community, but who also have time to be cross-trained in other useful things that would have more reality of coming up in the meantime. Within one generation, you can amass for the masses the wealth of your community. And that means that you improve the soil fertility, you clean up the water, you plant trees, you make as much energy production as you can with the things that you have. You improve every house and make sure that every neighborhood has a hub. You have community centers, and you have food production and food preservation and delicious cooking and cuisine that's particular, that draws in visitors. And wouldn't it be so fun to have a welcome in every community so that we can travel and not have it be expensive, that we can travel and we can meet with other people who enjoy the same things that we do, and we can be useful while we're there and bring our skills and also learn and take things back. That's the world I want to live in. If this is the world that you want, we need to really understand money. And so here's who stole the assets on Anwar Shaikh. And then we need to understand spirituality. So here is, are you ready to save the world? Thank you for being part of my community. And my subscribers between Substack and YouTube are at almost 800. Thank you.